Speaker. He's doing speech number 10, Inspire Your Audience, from the basic manual. What can one say about Lance? Now, those of you who have been around 20 years remember a certain president of our club. So every introduction was, what can one say? Well, one can say a lot about Lance. Fortunately, I'm not going to. Actually, the 2005 world champion of public speaking, Mr. Lance Miller, is doing a speech. He borrowed from Robert Frost. The title of his speech is called The Road Less Traveled. Yay. The Road Less Traveled, Mr. Lance Miller.
Yes, Robert Frost wrote a poem that talks about coming to a wood and looking at how to get through it, and there's a path that's well worn, and he chose the road less traveled. And I think that when all of us look at our lives on how we wound up here in Porter Ranch, California, at the home of Carol and Ray on a Sunday morning, we're all on our little road less traveled to even be here today. And the vast majority of us are also on another road less traveled, which is that of spiritual enlightenment and getting to know yourself completely and fully on who you truly are, which is on the path of Scientology, which again is truly a road less traveled. But one of the things I do quite often is I ask myself, how did I get here? And it's interesting just to stop sometimes, wherever you are, and go, how did I get here? Those of you, of course, know me that I grew up in this little town in Indiana. How did I wind up here today in my life? And there's so many times that I'm somewhere. And I go, how did I get here? And one of the ones that comes to mind to me was, I was in Porto, Portugal. Porto, Portugal is where port wine comes from. It's a very ancient city. And I had flown over at a late night, got up early, took the train from Lisbon up to Porto, did 3 lectures at the University of Porto that day, and I was absolutely exhausted. And they had booked me at the executive suite in this beautiful 5-star hotel, which doesn't happen very often, under the name Professor Lance Miller. And when I came in, everybody would introduce. They said, "Oh, good morning, Professor." Well, this is sort of cool. And we had a private dining area on the top of the restaurant.
Wow.
And I went up on the top of the restaurant to have a beer at the end of the day, and I'm literally looking west, watching the sunset over Porto into the Atlantic, drinking a beer.
Wow. Wonderful.
And I'm thinking about all these human rights runs I'd done where I'd slept on couches and floors and those little IKEA cots that you get. I can't tell you how many of those I slept on. And here I am, sort of at the top of the world, drinking this beer, watching the sunset over Porto, Portugal. And I remember asking, how did I get here? How did I get here? One of the things that I know life comes down to is nothing more than a series of decisions. And it's interesting that no action in life precedes a decision. And so whenever we're wanting to go someplace and do something, we must first decide to do it. And one of the things I love to do is dig into the dictionary. And those of you that know Frank Zern from ABLE, Frank is a phenomenal person with definitions of words and taught me really how to clear a word and has his own definitions. And one of the things that he did with the definition of the word decide was break it down. And D, I looked it up and I did my own clearing on it, but I came to the same conclusion. It comes from 2 Latin words, DE, which means to and away from, and side, C-I-D-E. Now, what other words in the English language end with C-I-D-E?
Suicide,
Suicide, homicide, suicide, right? So it actually means to kill. So really, when you decide, you kill one side. Which is an interesting point, because there were times in my life I thought I made a decision, and you always wondered, should I have taken the other job? Should I have bought the other car? Should I have ordered the other thing on the menu, or married the other girl, or whatever, right? The decision. Did I really kill the other side? Now, I'm not saying you should go kill somebody. But the point is, when you actually make a decision, that is now the path you're on. The other one should be dead. It actually technically means side means to cut off. What it means. So when you decide, you cut off one side, and you only have one way to go. And there were a number of times that I had certain decisions that came up, and one of them was I had to make a decision 26 when my life plan was not working out, which was to be in this family business and whatnot. I had to make that decision to move away. It was probably one of the toughest decisions I had to make in my life. And that was on a road less traveled, because it was not the road I thought I was going to be on. But yet I was still on this road where I was trying to do what everybody would say, oh, that's a great road to be on. And I was failing miserably for me in life. People would look at great jobs, they were saying how fantastic, but I was not happy with what I was doing. I felt very lost. You know? And of course another huge decision in my life was when I started picking up some books and I was looking for answers. And I remember when I read Problems of Work, and there was one little phrase in there, I've never been able to find it, but I had this huge cognition that LRH said something along the line that most people want to do a great job, but they work in organizations that are so poorly organized that they aren't able to do a great job. And that resonated so much with me, because I wanted to do so well, but these places I was working were so freaking confusing, I couldn't figure out how to get my own energy going. And that decision to start studying Scientology, and you know, especially with all of the people that don't want it to succeed, so they decide to fill the world with lies on it and things and the misconceptions, and all those people that can't make a decision for themselves, they can't look at things in their own eyes, and those of us that find the truth and decide that no matter what happens, we're going to stick with that path because we know what it's gotten for us. So there's these decisions that come along, and one of the speeches I remember so well, several years ago, from Craig Shields, and Craig isn't in the club anymore, but he talked about how many days we live. And he goes, it's not that many. If you live to about 85, you're going to live somewhere around 30,000 days. Now here's the rough part with me. I'm over 20,000 at this point. And I would typically look at my life based on years. I really wouldn't even look at it based on months. It was sort of years. Where was I a year from now? Once I heard that speech, I started looking at my life on a daily basis. And one of the things I hate to have happen is a day go by that I don't feel that I made forward progress or that I really used that day well. I hate to waste a day. And there's a decision I make every morning when I wake up. And that decision is, am I more excited to get out of bed and go do what I'm going to go do than sleeping and staying in bed? These are a lot of years of my life that I woke up and I wanted to stay in bed. Not because I was tired, but because I hated what I was going to go do that day. I hated the people I had to work with. I hated the things I had to do. I hated, you know, the whole game I was in. It had nothing to do with me. And thus, I was on a road that was being traveled by several people. Because most people live lives of quiet desperation, thinking something's going to change. And all of a sudden, they turn 60, 70, 80 years old, and they look back and they realize things that they could have done in their life. Fortunately, whatever, I did it in half the time. I think I was in my mid-40s. And then I look back at that time period from about 25 to 45, and I went, God, I wasted all those years because I felt like I was just swimming in this confusion. Along that whole game of decisions, when I was president of the Way to Happiness, I had to explain to people the difference between morals and ethics without using any Scientology references, because the Way to Happiness is not Scientology. And as soon as I used Scientology references, I broke what I call the blood-brain barrier, and I now made it Scientology. So I cracked the dictionary open, and I started looking up words, and I started to realize that society has this whole system for handling the reactive impulses that mankind has. And Will Durant said the control of impulse is the first principle of civilization. And he talks about man being sort of cave-dwelling creatures, and he had to be very impulsive to survive, had to strike quickly or he wouldn't eat, and had to have a strong sex drive and propagate a lot of children or they die. But when we moved together into tribes, those impulses that were the virtues that kept them alive became the vices in the tribe. You can no longer strike quickly. You can no longer see some woman you want and drag her back to your tent and ravage her, right? Because she was with some other guy, and he'd have an impulse, and he'd come beat you up, and then two guys are dead. Now the tribe has to handle two families that have no men to support them. So he said the moral code is the tool that society has used since time immemorial to handle the impulses of mankind. And a moral code, by definition, is a code that allows the group to survive. Not necessarily this individual. The group survives. And of course, laws are simply more codes that can be enforced against our will. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And the way that it's enforced is with something called a penalty. And a penalty means to end the resolve for the resulting state of pain. Okay, so what we do is we wind up handling impulses with impulses, and we get more impulses as we go down and from moral codes to laws to penalties, right? And if you look at, what typically happens when we get penalized, we want to strike back, right? You get a parking ticket, they don't charge you 25 cents. Because you forgot to put 25 cents in the meter. No, they charge you $65. It's got to be painful.
Yeah.
But the thing above morals is this thing called ethics. And we have this incredible technology in Scientology for ethics, but when I actually got the dictionary and cleared it, it really came down to this. Ethics is the ability to simply make a correct decision. Have you ever gone to an ethics officer because you made an incorrect decision? Just once, right? Made one incorrect decision and you wound up sitting down with an ethics officer trying to work out why your life's such a mess. No, we made the incorrect decision over and over and over and over again. And then we had to sit down and say, why do you keep making this stupid decision, right? And so what I started to look at was that, especially with all the different incredible bridge actions we get to do now, and Michael, like you're talking about the SLP, it's just an incredible journey in unleashing of ourself, which is so phenomenal, is that ability. The decisions I looked at I had to make was the ability to make decisions that forwarded my purpose in life. And what was happening when I was on the common road, I was on a common road of somebody else's purpose. When I was working for my family's business, I was on the road of the family's purpose and the family's goals, and they weren't really mine, but I had mine I was chipping away with. I was making decisions and I was in conflict. And as I moved to California and all those years of working jobs, and people were saying, you got a great job, they were decisions I made to follow somebody else's purpose. But as I started to make decisions to follow my purpose, and one of them was in October of 1992 in joining this group. And one of them was those decisions to compete every time I could, and the decision to help build this club to be one of the top clubs in the world, and the decision to come to the meeting every Sunday. And the little decisions, day after day after day, to continually put me on my purpose, I realized that being on my purpose, I am actually traveling the road less traveled. I am trying to narrow it. I'm trying to make it more my path. But there are so many times I do wake up and I go, I can't believe what I get to do now. I get to go around the world, it's like getting paid to go on vacation, and talk to people who admire me because I admire them. And give advice and inspire and be out, hopefully, bringing a better existence to individuals in their life. And those were a series of decisions, and they weren't always easy decisions. So my wish, my holiday wish for you is that you travel the road less traveled on your purpose and making a little decisions every day to keep yourself true to your goals and purposes, because that is where the true joy and spirit of Christmas, the prosperity of the new year, and the absolute, for me, joy of living every day comes is when you are actually achieving the things you want in your life, which each one of us is so good and benefits so many when we are on purpose. So travel the road less traveled.